Last Saturday morning, I found a golden retriever wandering around my neighborhood with no collar, looking lost and hungry. I did what any decent person would do. I took him in, fed him, and spent the day trying to find his owner. When I finally tracked down the address on his microchip and knocked on the door to return him, the woman who answered made my knees buckle. Standing in front of me was someone I hadn't seen in 23 years. Someone I'd been searching for my entire adult life, someone who had saved me from the worst night of my childhood and then vanished without a trace. But here's what I didn't know. She had been looking for me too, and the reason why will change how you think about fate, family, and the invisible threads that connect our lives in ways we never imagine. My name is David Martinez, and I'm about to tell you the most incredible story of my life. This isn't just about finding a lost dog or an amazing coincidence. It's about how sometimes the universe conspires to bring the right people back into our lives exactly when we need them most. By the end of this story, you'll understand why I believe that some people are meant to be in our lives forever, even when they disappear for decades. And you'll never look at a stray animal the same way again. To understand why finding this woman was so important, I need to take you back to when I was 7 years old, living in foster care in Detroit. I'd been in the system for 3 years by then, bouncing between homes that ranged from neglectful to downright dangerous. My biological parents had lost custody when I was 4 due to drug addiction and abuse. I was what social workers called a difficult placement, a kid with behavioral problems, trust issues, and a tendency to run away. By age 7, I'd been in 6 different foster homes. I was angry, scared, and convinced that no adult could be trusted. I had good reason to feel that way. The worst foster home was the Hendersons. Mr. Henderson seemed nice enough during the social worker visits, but when she left, he became someone completely different. He had a temper, a drinking problem, and the belief that children should be seen and not heard. Mrs. Henderson was too scared of her husband to protect the foster kids in their care. There were 4 of us, me, 2 other boys, and a girl named Lucy, who was only 5 years old. The night that changed everything happened on a cold February evening in 1999. Mr. Henderson had been drinking since he got home from work, and he was in one of his moods. Lucy had accidentally spilled juice on his newspaper, and he exploded. What happened next was the kind of thing that scars a child forever. Mr. Henderson grabbed Lucy and started screaming at her, calling her names that no adult should ever call a child. When she started crying, he got angrier. I watched from the doorway as he raised his hand to hit her. Something inside me snapped. Despite being only 7 and terrified of Mr. Henderson, I ran between them and yelled, "Don't hurt her." Mr. Henderson turned his rage on me instead. What followed was the worst beating of my young life. But I didn't regret it. At least Lucy was safe. When it was over, Mr. Henderson locked me in the basement as punishment. It was February in Detroit. The basement was unheated, and I was wearing only a thin t-shirt and pajama pants. I was hurt, freezing, and convinced I was going to die down there. I don't know how long I was in that basement. It felt like forever, but it was probably only a few hours. I was drifting in and out of consciousness from the cold when I heard footsteps upstairs, then voices. Someone was arguing with Mr. Henderson, a woman's voice, firm and angry, demanding to know where I was. The basement door opened and light flooded down the stairs. A woman I'd never seen before came down, took one look at me, and immediately wrapped me in her coat. "Oh, sweetheart," she whispered, gathering me in her arms. "I'm so sorry. You're safe now. I'm going to get you out of here." The woman, I later learned her name was Elena Rodriguez, was a social worker, but not my assigned caseworker. She'd gotten a tip from a neighbor who'd heard the commotion and was concerned about the children in the Henderson house. Elena took me to the hospital first, then to an emergency foster placement. But before she left me that night, she sat on the edge of my hospital bed and made me a promise I'll never forget. "David, I want you to know something. What happened to you tonight was not your fault. You were brave to protect Lucy. And I promise you,
I'm going to make sure you never have to go through anything like this again. She squeezed my hand. You're going to have a good life, David. I'm going to make sure of it.
For the next few weeks, Elena visited me regularly. She was working on finding me a permanent placement with a family who would actually care about me. She brought me books, helped me with homework, and most importantly, she listened to me. Elena was the first adult who had ever made me feel like I mattered. She saw past my behavioral problems to the scared, hurt kid underneath. She made me believe that maybe, just maybe, I could have a normal life. Then one day, she just stopped coming. My new caseworker, Mrs. Patterson, told me that Elena had been transferred to a different department. When I asked for her contact information so I could write to her, Mrs. Patterson said it was against policy. Elena Rodriguez had saved my life and then vanished like she'd never existed. As I grew up, I never stopped thinking about Elena. She had kept her promise. I was eventually placed with an amazing family, the Martinezes, who adopted me when I was 10. I had a good life, just like she'd predicted, but I always wondered what had happened to her. Why had she disappeared so suddenly? Was she okay? Did she ever think about the scared 7-year-old boy she'd rescued from that basement? When I became an adult, I tried everything to find her. I contacted the social services department, hired a private investigator, searched social media. But Elena Rodriguez seemed to have vanished completely. I began to wonder if I'd imagined how important our connection had been. Maybe I was just a case file to her, one of hundreds of children she'd helped over the years. By last Saturday, I was 30 years old, married to an amazing woman named Sarah, and working as a teacher in the same Detroit neighborhood where I'd grown up. We'd been trying to have children for 3 years with no success, and the fertility treatments were taking an emotional toll on both of us. I'd been feeling particularly down that week. Another failed treatment cycle, another month of disappointment. Sarah was at her sister's house for the weekend, giving us both some space to process our emotions. That's when I found the dog. I was sitting on my front porch Saturday morning, drinking coffee and feeling sorry for myself, when this golden retriever came wandering down the street. He was beautiful, but clearly lost. No collar, dirty, and thin, like he hadn't eaten in days. The dog saw me and walked right up to my porch like he knew me. He sat down at my feet and looked up at me with these soulful brown eyes that seemed to say, "Help me." I'm not usually impulsive, but something about this dog got to me. Maybe it was because I knew what it felt like to be lost and alone. Maybe it was because I needed something to focus on besides my own problems. I brought him inside, gave him food and water, and decided I'd spend the day trying to find his owner. The dog was friendly and well-trained, clearly someone's beloved pet. I walked around the neighborhood showing his picture to people, posted on social media, and called local animal shelters. Finally, I took him to a veterinary clinic to see if he had a microchip. He did, and the vet was able to give me the owner's contact information. The address was across town, in a neighborhood I didn't know well. The phone number went straight to voicemail, so I decided to just drive over and return the dog in person. During the drive, the dog sat in my passenger seat like he'd been riding in my car his whole life. I found myself talking to him about my week, my marriage struggles, my general feeling that life wasn't going the way I'd planned. "At least you'll be going home soon, buddy," I told him as we pulled into the driveway of a small, well-maintained house with a beautiful garden. I knocked on the door, holding the dog's makeshift leash, preparing to reunite him with his family. When the door opened, I started my prepared speech. "Hi, I found your dog wandering around my neighborhood this morning. He's been—" I stopped mid-sentence. The woman standing in front of me had gray hair now instead of black, and lines around her eyes that hadn't been there 23 years ago. But I would have recognized her anywhere. "Elena?" I whispered. Her eyes widened and she stared at me for a long moment. Then her hand flew to her mouth. "David? Little David Martinez?" The dog, apparently tired of our reunion, walked past both of us into the house like he owned the place. We stood there staring at each other for what felt like forever.
Elena looked exactly like I remembered, just older. The same kind eyes, the same gentle smile, the same presence that had made a terrified 7-year-old feel safe. "I can't believe it's you," she said, tears starting to form in her eyes. "Look at you, you're all grown up. I've been looking for you for years," I managed to say. "I tried everything. I thought maybe you'd moved away or—" "Oh, David." Elena stepped forward and, just like she had 23 years ago, wrapped me in a hug that made me feel like everything was going to be okay. "I've been looking for you too."
Elena invited me inside, and we sat in her living room while the dog, whose name I learned was Buddy, made himself comfortable on the couch between us. "I need to explain why I disappeared," Elena said. "It wasn't by choice, David. I was forced to leave." "What do you mean?" Elena took a deep breath. "After I rescued you from the Hendersons, I filed a report about what had happened, but Mr. Henderson had connections in the system, friends who helped cover up his abuse. When I pushed for a full investigation, I was told to drop it or face consequences." My heart sank. "You were punished for saving me?" "I refused to drop the investigation. I had evidence of what he'd done to you and the other children. So they transferred me to a different department, then made my life so difficult that I eventually had to quit social work altogether." Elena continued her story, and with each detail, I understood more about why she'd vanished from my life. "I tried to keep track of you through unofficial channels. I knew you'd been placed with the Martinez family and that you were doing well. But I was told that any attempt to contact you directly would be considered harassment and could result in criminal charges. So you've known where I was all these years? I knew you were adopted and that your new family was good to you. I knew you graduated high school, went to college, became a teacher. I was so proud of you, David, but I couldn't tell you that." Elena wiped her eyes. "I've driven past your school so many times, hoping to catch a glimpse of you. I've followed your life from a distance, celebrating your successes and worrying about your struggles. But, Elena, how did you know about my struggles? How could you follow my life that closely?" Elena smiled sadly. "Because your adoptive mother, Maria Martinez, is my cousin." The room spun. "What?" "Maria and I grew up together. When I was looking for the perfect family for you, I thought of Maria and Roberto. They'd been trying to have children for years, and I knew they would love you like their own son." I stared at her, trying to process this information. "So you've been getting updates about me from my mom this whole time?" "Maria didn't know I was the social worker who had rescued you. I made her promise never to tell you about our family connection because I was afraid it would complicate your adjustment to your new family." Elena continued. "Maria would call me with updates about your life. Your first day of school, your baseball games, your graduation, your wedding. She never knew she was talking to the woman who had saved you from that basement." "Why didn't you ever tell her?" "Because I was afraid. Afraid that if the truth came out, someone might try to take you away from the Martinez family. Afraid that my past involvement might somehow hurt your future." Elena looked down at her hands. And as the years went by, it became harder and harder to explain why I'd kept the secret for so long. Suddenly, so many things about my childhood made sense. Why my adoptive mother had always been so interested in my emotional well-being. Why she'd been so patient with my behavioral problems. Why she'd always seemed to know exactly what I needed to heal from my trauma. Mom knew, didn't she? She knew what I'd been through before I came to live with them? Elena nodded. "I told her everything. I wanted to make sure she understood what you'd experienced and how to help you heal. But I made her promise never to tell you that the information came from me. And she never broke that promise. Maria is a woman of her word. She's protected both of us all these years." I looked at Buddy, who was sleeping peacefully on the couch, completely unaware that he'd just orchestrated the most important reunion of my life. "Elena, how long has Buddy been missing?" She looked confused. "Missing? Buddy wasn't missing. He was in my backyard this morning when I left for the grocery store. But he was wandering around my neighborhood, looking lost and hungry." Elena stared at me, then at Buddy. "David, what's your address?"
I told her, and her eyes widened. That's impossible. You live 12 miles from here. There's no way Buddy could have walked that far, and he's never left my yard before. We both looked at the dog, who opened one eye, looked at us, and then went back to sleep. Elena got up and checked her backyard. The fence was intact. The gate was still latched. There was no way Buddy could have escaped on his own. David, I've had Buddy for 3 years. He's never shown any interest in leaving the yard. He's afraid of cars. Won't even walk to the end of the block with me. But he walked 12 miles through the city to find me? It doesn't make sense. Unless... Elena trailed off, looking at Buddy with a new expression. Unless what? Unless he was meant to bring you home.
We spent the next hour trying to figure out how Buddy had ended up in my neighborhood. Elena called her neighbors, checked security cameras, even drove the route between our houses looking for clues. There was no logical explanation. A dog who was afraid of leaving his own yard had somehow traveled 12 miles through busy city streets to find a man he'd never met, leading to a reunion that both of us had been hoping for over 2 decades. David, Elena said as we sat back down in her living room, I need to tell you something else. Something I've never told anyone. What is it? The night I found you in that basement, I prayed. I'm not a particularly religious person, but I was so angry and heartbroken about what had happened to you that I got down on my knees and prayed. Elena's voice became soft, almost whispered. I prayed that somehow, someday, I would know that you were okay, that you were happy, that you had found the love and family you deserved. She looked at Buddy, then back at me. This morning, I was having a particularly hard day. Yesterday was the anniversary of the night I found you, and I was thinking about you, wondering if you were happy, if you remembered me, if you knew how much you meant to me. And then Buddy disappeared. And then Buddy disappeared only to bring you back to me on the exact day I needed to see you most. Elena asked about my life, and I found myself telling her things I hadn't told anyone else. About the fertility struggle Sarah and I were facing, about feeling like I was failing as a husband, about wondering if the trauma from my early childhood had somehow made me incapable of creating the family I desperately wanted. David, Elena said gently, do you remember what I told you in the hospital that night? You said I was going to have a good life. I said you were going to have a good life, and I was going to make sure of it. That promise didn't end when I had to stop being your caseworker. Elena got up and went to a bookshelf, returning with a photo album I hadn't noticed before. I want to show you something. Elena opened the album, and I gasped. It was full of pictures of me, school photos, newspaper clippings from when I made the honor roll, a photo from my wedding that must have come from my mom. I've been keeping track of your good life, David. Every achievement, every milestone, every moment of happiness. You've had exactly the life I prayed you would have. She turned to a recent page, including this. It was a photo of Sarah and me at a school event, both of us laughing at something one of my students had said. We looked happy, in love, like a couple who could weather any storm together. Elena, we've been trying to have a baby for 3 years. The doctors say there's nothing wrong with either of us, but it's just not happening. I'm starting to think maybe I'm not meant to be a father. Elena closed the album and looked at me with the same expression she'd had when I was 7 years old, like she could see straight into my soul. David, do you know why I never had children of my own? I shook my head. Because I spent my life taking care of other people's children, children like you, who needed someone to fight for them, to believe in them, to love them when their own families couldn't. Elena reached over and took my hand. David, some people are meant to be parents in traditional ways. Others are meant to be parents to children who need them most. You're a teacher, David. You're already a father to dozens of children every year. But that doesn't mean you won't have biological children too, Elena continued. It just means that your purpose in life is bigger than just your own family. You were saved for a reason, David. You survived that basement. You overcame your trauma.
You became a man who protects and nurtures children, just like you protected Lucy that night. I thought about my students, about how many of them came from difficult backgrounds, about how I'd always felt a special connection to the kids who seemed angry or scared or lost. You think that's why I became a teacher? Because of what happened to me?
As if on cue, my phone rang. It was Sarah. "David, where are you? I've been trying to call you all day." "I'm sorry, honey. I found a lost dog this morning and I've been trying to return him to his owner. It's been complicated." "Well, I have news. Can you come home? I need to tell you something in person." Something in Sarah's voice made my heart race. "Is everything okay? Just come home, David, please." I looked at Elena, who was smiling like she knew something I didn't. "Go," she said. David, this isn't goodbye this time. I want to be part of your life if you'll let me." "Of course, Elena. I've missed you every day for 23 years. The drive home was surreal. In the span of one day, I'd found a lost dog, reunited with the woman who had saved my life, learned that she was related to my adoptive family, and discovered that she'd been watching over me for decades. But more than that, I felt something I hadn't felt in months: hope. Elena's words about purpose and different kinds of parenthood had shifted something in my perspective. Maybe Sarah and I were meant to have children in our own time. Maybe we were meant to adopt like my parents had adopted me. Maybe we were meant to be the kind of people who opened our home to children who needed us most. When I walked into our house, Sarah was sitting on the couch with tears in her eyes and a smile on her face. "Sarah, what's wrong? What's the news?" She held up a small white stick. "David, I'm pregnant." The room spun. After 3 years of trying, countless doctor's visits, and months of feeling like we were failing, Sarah was finally pregnant. "Are you sure?" She took 4 tests. "I'm sure." I sat down next to her and pulled her into my arms. "When did you find out?" She took. As I held Sarah and processed the news that we were finally going to have a baby, I thought about the incredible timing of this day. Elena had prayed for a sign that I was happy and living a good life. On the same day she was struggling with that anniversary, Buddy had somehow found his way to me, leading to our reunion. And on the same day I reunited with the woman who had saved me as a child, I learned that I was going to become a father myself. Sarah, I have something to tell you too. Something incredible happened today. I told her about finding Buddy, about discovering that his owner was Elena Rodriguez, about learning the truth about my rescue and my adoption. David, that's impossible. What are the odds? I don't think it was about odds. I think it was about timing. 2 weeks later, Sarah and I had dinner with Elena and my adoptive parents, Maria and Roberto. It was the first time Elena and Maria had seen each other in over 20 years, and the first time my parents learned that Elena was the social worker who had rescued me. "Elena," my mom said, tears in her eyes, "I can never thank you enough for what you did for David and for trusting us with him. Maria, you gave him the life I could only dream of giving him. You made him into the man he is today." Elena looked at me across the dinner table. "And now he's going to be a father himself." The cycle continues. 8 months later, Sarah gave birth to a healthy baby girl. We named her Elena Maria Martinez. Elena for the woman who saved me, Maria for the woman who raised me. When I placed baby Elena in Elena Rodriguez's arms for the first time, she cried. "She's beautiful, David. She's going to have a wonderful life." I said, "She's going to have something I didn't have for the first 7 years of my life. She's going to have a family that loves her from the very beginning." Elena smiled. "And she's going to have a father who understands that love means protecting the people who can't protect themselves." As I watched Elena hold my daughter, I realized something profound about the journey that had brought us all together. Buddy hadn't just wandered into my neighborhood by accident. He had been the instrument of something much bigger, a reunion that needed to happen, a circle that needed to be completed.
a family that needed to be whole. Elena had saved me as a child, but in finding her again, I had saved her too. She had spent 23 years wondering if her sacrifice had been worth it, if the boy she'd rescued had grown up to be happy and whole. Now she knew, and now she could be part of the family she had helped create. But the most important lesson wasn't about coincidences or fate or even family. It was about the invisible threads that connect us to the people who matter most in our lives. Elena and I had been separated for over 2 decades, but we had never really been apart. She had been watching over me through my adoptive mother. I had been carrying her memory and her influence in everything I did. The love that had passed between us in that hospital room when I was 7 years old had never died. It had just been waiting for the right moment to bring us back together. Today, Elena is Grandma Elena to our daughter and the son we adopted 2 years later, a boy from foster care who reminded me so much of myself at that age. She comes to every school play, every birthday party, every family gathering. She's the grandmother she never got to be to her own biological children, and we're the family she never thought she'd have. Buddy, now 6 years old, is our daughter's best friend and constant companion. He still has no explanation for how he traveled 12 miles to find me that day, but we've stopped questioning it. Some things are meant to be mysteries, some things are meant to be miracles. The next time you find a stray animal, I want you to remember this story. Don't just think about returning them to their owner. Think about where they might be leading you. Because sometimes a lost dog isn't really lost at all. Sometimes they're exactly where they're supposed to be, bringing together the people who need to find each other. Elena saved me from that basement 23 years ago, but Buddy saved us both from a lifetime of wondering, what if? He brought us back together exactly when we needed each other most, when Elena needed to know her sacrifice had mattered, and when I needed to understand that my purpose in life was bigger than my own struggles. But there's one more thing about this story that I haven't told you yet, something I discovered just last month that makes me believe even more strongly that some connections are meant to last forever. Because when I was going through Elena's old files to help her organize them, I found something that changed everything I thought I knew about that night in the basement. I found a letter Elena had written but never sent. A letter that reveals she knew something about my biological family that she never told me. Something that explains not just why I was in foster care, but why finding each other again was always inevitable. And what I learned about my past makes me wonder if our reunion was just the beginning of an even bigger story. But that's a mystery for another day.